So check this out, right? I've been studying political science, all right? And I've been reading this book by Aristotle. It's called Politics. It was written in ancient Greek time. Right now, what I'm actually studying in poli-sci is rule of law. And in its most simple definition, rule of law is that no one is above the law. Right, so I don't have my notes with me, so I'm just going to go straight from the heart and what I have from memory, because I think that that will be a much more accurate representation of the way that I understand what it is that I am working on. In the very beginning of the book, Aristotle talks about aiming at the highest good, and that in many ways this is the whole point of anything that anyone ever does, is this concept of a good. I believe his mission is to create a sort of flow of thought that allows a collective to work in a unit towards a greater good. And this book, actually, Politics, is connected to the rule of law because a lot of the structure of our government, I believe, is based on Aristotle and his studies, his theories, his work. So far, I have only been analyzing book 1. There's 8 books, I believe. And I began reading book 2, but before I got there, I wanted to do something where I could completely get to a thorough conclusion about book 1. I think the basic argument that he is trying to make, and I'm going to talk about whether I feel like he's successful or not. The basic argument that I think he's trying to make in this book, right, is that a successful system of justice does not include a fundamental principle of equality. Equality doesn't always equal justice, and that in many ways this concept of equality can be detrimental to the service of justice to the community. Do I think that he's successful in argumenting this approach? Yes, I do. He does this in a number of ways, which I find really interesting because he gives a lot of different, mainly the same sort of scale of power, but different objects that will give you the exact same perception of rule. And he does this using a master and a slave. And then he goes on to use a man and a woman. And then I believe another one, which is not as blatantly expressed, but he also talks about human versus nature. Okay. A basis, right, to set a foundation in order to really define this concept of a government, right? He talks about how it is constructed, and in its most simple definition, the government is a household, period. This household is a cultivation, like a group of multiple households that come together and form a village, that then multiple villages come together and create a state, and then a state comes together with multiple states in order to create a nation or country, right? And this is what manifests what it is that we see today. But again, in its most simple definition, even if all of these things come together to create something larger, it is still a singular thing. Household. I want to say it's like Legos. If you take a singular Lego block and then you take another Lego block, you connect it, you take another one, you take another one, you take another one, you take another one, and eventually you got a castle. But ultimately, it is a Lego block in its most simple form, manifesting it and forming it into this new idea is really just a reflection or idealized way of perceiving what it is that you begin with. Because of the fact that the government is formed of households, in reality, this desire for justice is natural, and that the government itself is a creation of nature. This desire for justice ultimately is what bounds men together. It is for the highest good for men to desire justice, okay? Any man that does not desire justice, right? This concept of justice, I want to say really to him in the book, in terms of the terminology and his argument, justice would be defined as a system made on the agreement of virtue, justice, and that all who desire justice ultimately are intended to conform to this system of virtue. And virtue in the book is not defined by a soul that is good or bad, but authority. The ability that a person has to have moral values, that a person has good judgment, and also is authoritative and can assert their power. And then when we get down into this concept of virtue, right, he explains that a man who rules, meaning that he has power and he has influence, a man with influence, a slave cannot have virtue simply because he is a slave. He is a possession, an instrument. And we're going to talk about that later. But a slave does not have virtue, right? And a woman has virtue, but it is of no authority. A child has virtue, but it is immature. So it is up to the man to instill within his slaves and his wife and his children the virtue that he has, meaning the moral values and also a sense of authority, right? That they view him as an authoritative figure because he is able to make decisions and to pass judgment for them, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about how there's also another kind of comparison that is evident in the book that it isn't like blatantly spoken. I mean, it is, but you sort of have to put the pieces together a little bit in your head because the argument sort of flows like a conversation in a way, which I really love because he kind of goes on these tangents that are very, very well thought out examples of the argument that he's making. I also think it's beautiful because he doesn't just say his side. He always, in the first book at least, presents both sides of the argument, and he argues both sides and presents you with evidence of his opposition, and then he gives his own argument, and then he's able to make a conclusion that gives the reader an ability to sort of see really where he's coming from, and not, to sort of prove that what he's saying isn't entirely a biased perspective, but based on virtue, right? His ability to have clear judgment and be authoritative, right? The entire book is really him being an authoritative figure. And I remember when like I first started reading it, and I was like, whoa, why does it feel like he's controlling my thoughts? It's like when you read the book, you are subject to his own thoughts. Maybe I should have said that in the beginning. But when you read the book, it will be as if, right, he is controlling the flow of thoughts in your mind. You will have absolutely no control over the way your own process is while you are reading this book. You will be completely subject to Aristotle's virtue, right? And his own ruling, his own idea of justice. It is completely engraved into you as if he would be this sort of dominant male authoritative figure that he seems to kind of define as the government. Yeah, I was just completely mind blown, one, by the fact that he doesn't really give you any way to assume when you're reading. You don't have to assume what it is that he's talking about or assume how he feels about something. No, you will know, and it will be how you feel while you read it. And that is something that I love because it is also an even greater kind of expression or example of what it is that he is explaining. That the book itself is this concept of virtue that relates to this justice system and that like provides man with sanity, right? So this is where I talk about that other comparison that he kind of does throughout the first book, which is a barbarian versus a man with virtue. So there is this concept of a barbarian that in the times of the book, right, the terminology of the book, a barbarian is basically someone who does not belong to a political community. And if we want to get into this concept of a political community, it's one of the very first things that he actually says, like this phrase in the second book. And I know that that is a bit of a jump because I'm not talking about the second book, but it is basically what he is explaining in the beginning of the first book is a political community. And its very most simple definition would be a government. Okay, so a political community in its simple definition would be a government, and a government in its simple definition would be a household. This is the basis, right, of what was used to create the United States Constitution, this sort of thought pattern, and also how his authority and assertiveness throughout the book is sort of personified through the reader, or more so through the reader's mind, is also evident in the way, the personality of our government. It is very amazing. Whew. Anyways, so yes, I was talking about this concept of a barbarian in a political community. All right, so the political community, I was very interested in this concept of a community and how this can be linked to politics. But again, he sort of explains it like how I was saying, all of the households come together to create this collection of households that comes together to create this and this and this and this. And when you look up the definition or the like meaning of COMM, COMM, it is somehow an abbreviation for communication. And then when you have COMM, then you have unity, right? And unity is ultimately one. It is a whole. It is also seen as a agreement, a system of agreement. And so when you take this, right, you have political and then you have communication and you also have this system of agreement. So political community would, in my own definition, in order to really understand what he means when he is saying the word government at all, which I'm not even really sure if he does that many times or if he really does at all, because I don't have the book right here with me. But I know that he uses the term community and he does use the term politics. So political community, right, it would be a system of agreements that allows individuals who share similar commonalities to function as a whole. this entire concept of a barbarian is really, when you get down to it, he talks about a man who doesn't belong to society, right? And if this man doesn't belong to any community and he's not a part of society, but he is self-sufficient, he is either a beast or God, right? If he can exist in solitude and full self-containment, he is either a danger or completely uncontrollable. And either way, it puts the highest good at risk. And so he heavily sort of arguments this concept of desire for justice, because it then puts man into this society, into this community that functions as a whole and creates justice, right? It creates this sense of oneness and unity, which again is not necessarily equality. So then let's get into this concept of equality and why I feel like in the very first book, his main argument towards a successful government system is not equality. I don't know if that last sentence that I just said makes sense. It's kind of 12 something a.m. at night, but I mean in the morning. Wow. Okay, anyways, so listen. Then we start talking about the concept of a master and a slave, right? And right before that, he has this sort of disagreement with people who feel like all positions in a government have the same power. And people who see a king and a statesman, or in today terms, a mayor and a governor as the same. Or people who will see a policeman and a freaking mall cop of the same authority. Just because they both have power, people think that it's the same rule. And he's trying to explain the fact that does not make sense, one, and two, the belief that that two different levels of the government share the same kind of authority is detrimental to the success and the sort of service of justice that wasn't intended by creating this system in the first place. And so one of those ways is that he talks about the master and the slave, and how he speaks on this concept of household management, because it is sort of the first type of power that a man will know, the management of a household. And that people, he is trying to explain that the management of a household is not equivalent to managing an entire state. Included in this management of the household, there is the art of getting wealth. And whether the art of getting wealth is something that a man should be involving himself in, and does the management of a household, right, and the art of getting wealth, does these two being related help or harm this justice that we are trying to achieve? And if it does help it, then what does the art of getting wealth look like in a way that is progressive, right, and allows society to function as a whole? And if it harms us, then what does the art of getting wealth look like when it is out of alignment with this system of agreement of justice and functionality? So I kind of want to briefly talk about the master and slave sort of relationship, because I keep bringing it up. And in many ways, right, he talks about the fact that simply there are just people who are born to rule and people who are born to serve. And that is just it. basic to continue with this sort of argument of rule and like power, even though two people have the same ability to rule, that the authoritative presence they have is not the same, like a man and a woman. He expresses that the man will always be superior and the woman will always be inferior. It is not for the woman to get involved in the politics, but that she is involved in the community by learning and educating herself on the virtues of the man and allowing him to show her what it is that should be done, and that she helps him and supports him and maintains the order that he is establishing, right? Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of people have a problem, right, in today's society, especially because we have this sort of feminism movement, and that there has been a increase over generations of belief that men and women should have equal rights, equal power, equal authority, equal opportunity. And Aristotle is completely expressing the opposite. And now I had already said that I feel like this is a beautiful sort of solvent to the issues of society today. And even with this argument in there, I still stand on that. Why? Because I simply agree. The thing is that when you're talking about a woman, right, and you are talking about decision-making power, she is not by nature intended to be a force, but to be submissive. Why? Because nature is submissive. The woman within herself is the personification of the subconscious mind, right? The subconscious mind is legitimately intended to be penetrated by the thoughts of the conscious mind. The conscious mind, in this case that I'm speaking, would be the man. The subconscious would be the woman, right? They ultimately have this same ability to think. But the difference is that one is used to impress and the other to do. And I believe that this implies to the role of the man and the woman in the community and also in the household, because I feel like it establishes structure and just behavior. And this isn't, again, that the woman does not have the ability to think, but her authoritative figure is simply inferior to that of a man, which is why our entire government thinks like a man and only impresses but does not submit, right? This is what I am talking about. The entire book, he's impressing his thoughts onto your mind, and whether you like it or not, you're subject to exactly what he feels, and he leaves no room for you to deflect any of what he is thinking. Even if you may have disagreements, it doesn't stop him from impressing his ideas onto your mind and in some way influencing your thought patterns or your reaction or response to what it is that he is saying or what it is that you experience as justice. So, and he says that a man's rule over his wife is constitutional, and a man's rule over his children is that of a king. And I agree with this also. See, the thing is that I do genuinely believe that masculine dominance is the only real form of power in our government. And it will only ever be the type of force, the form of authority that has the ability to create actual change in our government system, right? It must be masculine and it must be dominant and also assertive. This is our government system that we are talking about. It acts as a male does. It is not something that we can change. And I also don't feel it is something that we should. Why? Because if the government, like he talked about in the beginning, is a creation of nature, and he speaks on the fact that that nature makes nothing in vain, right? And no thing is a mistake. And that ultimately nature provides everything to man that he would need. The only thing that could go wrong is if people defy what is natural and they choose not to do what is in their nature, okay? And in reality, I believe that women trying to dominate and fulfill male roles, masculine roles, is unnatural. And I think it creates imbalance in our justice system, karmic imbalance, because it is not natural for a woman to try to take a man's authority away by equating it to her own. And then he speaks on how someone who is inferior, right, to a type of power, believing that they are equivalent to their superior, 100% creates imbalance, and it prohibits this system of agreement from flowing. Because the thing is, you cannot have two conscious minds. It does not work that way. If you had two conscious minds, no thing in the universe would ever be created. If nature was not submissive, all things would only ever exist in theory. And no thing would ever be able to be proven to exist if it does not go through some sort of process that materializes it through impression and subjectiveness, submission, that allows it to be penetrated and then formed into material form. This is the same with women in politics. I don't care what anyone says. She can be the most intelligent person in the room, but whatever opinion she has on the nature of politics, right, does not have any authoritative power, and it should not, because it is unjust. It is simply just not right. That does not mean she doesn't have the power, right, or the ability to freely express herself. She can do that, but should it have any authority? Absolutely not. I do not believe, right, that a woman's definition of politics should ever be in consideration when creating a service to justice, because it is simply just not the nature of it. Now, can a man consult a woman? Absolutely. Why? Because they have the same ability to think, period. Now, if he takes that woman's thoughts and chooses to impress them onto his own mind, right? Then in that way she will have some type of authority, in which I believe that is the natural way in which a woman should have authority. I do not believe it should just be given to her. Now, I know how controversial this is, what I am saying. But when you come down to it, you think about a household, right? In general, if this is what our entire government is made of, the only way we will ever be able to fix what is happening, this injustice, is if we go into the household and we fix the imbalance, okay, in the flow of energy between the masculine and the feminine. And people get more focused and pay more attention, okay, to the management of their own home. because that is going to greatly impact the decisions that a man goes out, or a woman or a child goes out into the community and makes decisions. They get elected and get into the government and make decisions. And these decisions impact an entire nation. To sort of transition into a bit more present day reflection of this book, I think about how a lot of injustice, and there are infinite forms of injustice, but right now I'm talking about racial inequality and racial injustice, okay? A lot of people are upset at the government for never delivering equality to all. And I just think that that is a very weak argument for why you feel as though our justice system is unjust, or why the decisions of our justice system have been unjust, because they don't give equality to all. See, I feel like people are angry. People are afraid because they don't get what they want. They want the system of government to feed them by hand, pamper them, treat them special. Absolutely not. See, this is the problem, is that society wants handouts. We want the government to sit down and say, okay, yeah, we'll give equality to all. Yeah, we'll treat black people like they matter. Yeah, we are gonna create equal opportunity and give everyone the same exact rights and scale every single offense against our system the same. No, that doesn't even make any sense, first of all, because that is too idealistic. People are being unrealistic. The realism of it all is that the government cannot do anything that is not already being done in the household. Period. And if there is a karmic imbalance within our system of justice that is at a national level, then there is a karmic imbalance within our system of justice, okay, that is in a household level. Forgive me if I am speaking a little bit weird. It is legitimately 1:43 a.m. and I am making a podcast talking about Aristotle, politics, and our system of government. Okay, I just have not had sleep and I've been up for a while. So, but this is important and I just need to get it out because I'm tired of holding on to this. See, my problem with the black community is that we want justice from a system of government that had not considered us as human beings in the first place. And if we were considered a human, we were considered a property, which is an object that can be possessed. So the structure of our government does not include our rights at all, simply because we do not own anything, period. And what frustrates me is that we are conditioning every single generation of black children to grow up and fight for rights, fight for what it is that they believe in, which for some reason is equality. And I'm not saying that equality is not important and that it should not be a core value within the human. I am saying that it should not be something that we expect from a justice system, because the concept of equality within itself does not give any basis for clear judgment. Because if you give the same exact right to one person that you give another, there is no telling that these two individuals, right, will act for the highest good with the power that they are given. And this also relates to his argument about power, right? Two authority figures that rule but are not given the same amount of power for a reason. Why? Because it creates structure and order. It always leaves room for there to be an inferior, for the fact of impression. Somebody has to be able to be impressed upon. And if everyone is given the same exact amount of power, no one will ever know what is just. This doesn't excuse harmful things that have been done to society because of our government's process of judgment. But do I feel like it is a reason to stop expecting from them equality? Absolutely. Because it is just simply off of the table. If you want equality, then it should be something that you instill within your children. When you're at the dinner table, you should be telling your children that all are equal, if that is what you desire. But I'm telling you one thing, that will not be the reality of it. I think the whole point of our system of government is control and a sense of self. I think the existence of it is an expression of a discipline that is intended to keep the functioning of society in a way that does not create chaos. But I do not think it was intended to serve the needs of all, just because that is impossible. Everyone has different needs. There is no way that the government could create a system of structure that applies to the general order of a thing and include those who have no authority in the first place, like slaves, okay? And my thing is, people teach their children, and I feel like this is what really bothers me, is that people teach their children to provoke the police. People teach their children to fear. People teach their children that the government is against us, that the government disowns us. And this is the story since the beginning of our system. And the story will not change. That is my point. Is there a solution to the violation of people's basic human rights in our system of government? I believe there is, but it does not exist outside of the household, period. People are upset at the government for lying, cheating, stealing, killing. But yet, you will find households that are absent of fathers, right? And people will say that this is the fault of the government, but it is not. No, there is a lack, okay, of communication within the Black community that brings us to a sense of self that is one. Collectively, you within households, you have abuse, you have neglect, you have this, you have that. And I'm not saying that it exists within every single Black household, but what it does exist in is the entire Black community. And the fact of the matter is that if you have any energy to give towards being upset at our government, then that is energy that you are taking away from managing your household. Period. From teaching your children how to be righteous in the world, how to have a sense of morality, how to know what is good and what is actually bad. But if you are basing that good and that bad on the actions of the government, then you do not understand justice, and you do not understand what it means to love. Because if you are loving your child based on the wrong that was done to you, if you were teaching your child based on the wrong that was done to you, the hatred that you feel, the injustice that you have experienced, right? And you are penetrating and programming their minds to think like the world, okay? You are doing nothing but setting them up to go into the world and experience exactly what it is that you do not want done. Because that is all that they will be able to think about. That is the only way that they will act. And if in the households children are being programmed, okay, and manipulated into feeling oppressed by the government when they go out into the world, okay, this is exactly the experience that not only, like I said, they will create, but it will be the experience that is gifted to them by the environment, because it will be what they project, a state of oppression, period. And if anyone knows anything about the self, is that the material world, the physical world, is only a mirror, a giant reflection of your own psyche. And if people want to change the government, they need to change the thoughts that they are programming into their minds, their children's minds, about what is justice, what is virtue, what is a community, what is equality, what does it look like. And it does not always apply to having good judgment, because that is just not true. And so I think that how can people relate this book, right? And so far I'm only talking about the very first book of Politics by Aristotle. If you read this book, you will feel exactly the personality of our United States Constitution. You will know exactly what it would feel like if every thought in that Constitution manifested a human brain and a person's self. If you read it, it will become you. And you will know how it will feel to be inside of the mind of our Constitution and the being that constructed it, how they act, how they speak, how they think. You will know exactly how they are, and that enough is knowledge of self. And just to end this, on a expansive note, I guess, I've read this book. I don't remember who is the author, but there was this quote, and he talks about how people think that knowledge is power. And he says, no. See, that's where people go wrong. They think knowledge is power. But real wisdom understands that knowledge is only potential power. It is not the knowledge that gives you understanding, but what it is you do with the experience that you were gifted, the lesson that experience taught you, and your ability to use the information that you gained to create a healthier mind.